By now, it's about a week since the 2016 presidential election, an election in which a sufficient portion of the US voting population was either bigoted enough or greedy enough or angry enough or scared enough or just disillusioned enough to vote for Donald Trump as president. And here in New Zealand, we watched with a morbid fascination as a country so much larger than ours took, if not a step, then perhaps a giant leap towards its own self-destruction. And there was a sense of schadenfreude, of watching a disaster unfolding from a distance. But I think many of us were all too aware that we're not as far from the rest of the world as we think. It was only a century ago that our young men went to fight and to die in the fields of Europe, proving to us that isolation was not as far as we thought. It was less than 50 years ago when global nuclear war hung as a spectre over us in the South Pacific as it did over the entire world, proving to us that geographical isolation would not save us. And it was less than a decade ago when the global financial crisis proved to us that in a connected world, isolation is virtually non-existent. So we watched the US election knowing that it would affect us, if not directly then by proxy, if not obviously then in ways we could not yet conceive. And it offered us a lens by which to evaluate our country, in some ways vastly different to the United States, in some ways oddly familiar. We are, for example, the only two Western countries in which pharmaceutical advertising is permitted on broadcast television. So, how will a Trump presidency unfold? That is difficult to say. The man himself and the followers he has gathered around him have an unwavering knack for mendacity and for falsehood. They will deny having said something even when confronted directly by video evidence of them saying it. And for those who want me to give President Trump a chance, I ask, do you mean to give him a chance to do the destructive things he said he'll do, or to not do the destructive things he said he'll do? Trump is impulsive, he is inconstant in his moods, and history has demonstrated that he cares almost exclusively for his own self-interests. Now that the election is over, he has little motivation to help those who put him in power, even if they did believe or not believe his words. So if the individual is unpredictable, how then can we predict what the outcomes will be for America? Because Donald Trump is not in power alone. He has a Republican Senate. He has a Republican Congress. Thanks to the obstruction of these, he will have a Republican Supreme Court. And while there is no precedent for a man like Trump, there is definitely a precedent for right-wing governments in 21st century nations, both in the US and here in New Zealand. Less than a decade ago, we saw this with the George W. Bush administration, an administration which left us a financial meltdown and wars which are ongoing to this day. For the past 40 years, the policies of those who back free market, trickle-down economics have been predictable, and by this, we can confidently foresee the immediate future for the United States. We will see a large tax cut for the rich and for corporations, and a shift of the tax burden onto the middle class, the lower class, and the poor, just as we have seen under the Bush administration, and just as we have seen under the national government in New Zealand. This reduction in revenue will lead to deficits, borrowing, and rapidly increasing national debt, just as we saw under the Bush administration and just as we have seen under the national government in New Zealand. We will see cuts to social infrastructure, to health, to education, to welfare, to police, and we will see the predictable flow-on effects of these cuts, just as we saw under the Bush administration and just as we have seen under the national government in New Zealand. We will see the elimination of regulations, financial, corporate, and environmental. We will see the reduction in the strength of unions and on the rights of workers, on contracts and pay rates, just as we saw under the Bush administration and just as we have seen under the national government in New Zealand. We will see a rise in political corruption, just as we saw under the Bush administration and just as we have seen under the national government in New Zealand. We will see increased efforts in voter suppression, new ID laws, shorter voting times, less polling stations, more redistricting, all in a desperate attempt to prevent those who would vote against the government from being able to do so. And here, mercifully, we reach a divergence between the US and New Zealand politics. For while they are undeniably bound to the same economic ideology, our government has not yet felt the need to manipulate the electoral system to protect itself from democracy, unless you extend this definition to the use of parliamentary urgency rules to fast-track legislation with minimal debate, or the purging of popular media of dissenting investigative journalism, or the fostering of a culture of voter apathy that invariably tilts favour towards the right, or perhaps most blatant of all, the suspension of regional democracy in Canterbury for the last 6 years. But for all these failings, each worthy of their own separate commentary, I remain confident that those permitted to vote in this country are able to do so. Voter apathy may be fostered by the political climate, but the government does not use the law to disenfranchise those that would vote against them. Our elections are fair and open and efficient and are well run by thousands of dedicated volunteers across this country. And here's why this is most important. The US election is fresh in our minds, but for better or worse, there will not be another presidential election for another 4 years. Here in New Zealand, our election is no more than 52 weeks away. It may be much less. And like the United States, we are going to have to make a choice. For many of us, the US election has left us numb, it's left us apathetic, it's left us disillusioned. And the uncertainty, the mendacity, the bigotry of the Trump presidency is worthy of concern. But the fact is that as New Zealanders, our opinion had a minuscule, insignificant impact on the outcome of that election. In less than 52 weeks, there will be an election in which our opinion is the outcome. Finally, for those who think voting is futile, for those who think that both parties are just as bad and that nothing ever changes you, I urge you to reconsider and research where your parties actually stand, what their policies will mean to you and your friends and your family and your country. And I leave you with a quote from Winston Churchill, given to the House of Commons in 1947. Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those forms that have been tried from time to time. Take care and be heard.